Open your Bibles with me, if you would, to the book of Daniel tonight, Daniel chapter 8. In the latter half of the message today, there'll be a lot of technical work that would go comparing scriptures, but that's kind of the way when you are dealing with type. And I'll say right off from the start, it would seem to me that the little horn of Daniel 8 is Antiochus Epiphanes. History bears out that he fits the working of that one who would come out of one of the empires or one of the sections of the empires of Alexander the Great. History bears out these things, and it seems to fit, and that's almost universally what the commentators will tell you. Where they divide slightly is Antiochus Epiphanes, is he a type of the Antichrist? I lean towards that he is. I believe that it fits. And at any rate, what we'll see in the last few chapters of Daniel 8 will definitely parallel not only Antiochus Epiphanes, but it will also very much, and that's where we'll get into the technical portion, will also very much get into the what it would look like as a type and a parallel of the Antichrist. And so if you get to reading on it and you're trying to get varying viewpoints, you'll run across phrases like, of the little horn of Daniel chapter 8, we'll see a near fulfillment in a man, near in chronology, a couple hundred years, and then a later fulfillment as the type is fulfilled in the Antichrist. The Lord has been teaching these truths that relate to the times of the Gentiles. He's been teaching them to Daniel, and he's been giving them to him layer by layer. We saw the image of Nebuchadnezzar's dream and how that translated into 4 kingdoms. We saw the 4 beasts that represented those same 4 kingdoms with more information. We saw in chapter 8 2 of the kingdoms represented with yet more information. In fact, naming the names of some of the rulers well before they took office, well before they were born. And so, layer by layer, the Lord has been teaching the times of the Gentiles. What would come after Babylon, and how that the Medo-Persian Empire would take over, and how that the Greek Empire would take over after them, and so on. And those things are named, if you recall, in chapter 8, verses 20 and 21. And not only does the Lord teach layer by layer, but he teaches in type. And many times when there is something that's big, when there's something, the Bible teaches us in type to a great extent about the Lord, about his sovereignty, about his abilities, about his omniscience. The Bible teaches in type many times so that we can see an earthly picture and then be able to expand that out to the Lord. And I believe, and I lean towards the side of the commentator crowd that goes this way, that the little horn of Daniel 8 is in type, at least in part. There is that near fulfillment with Antiochus Epiphanes, but he is then also a type of the Antichrist, and that's in part so that we can get our minds wrapped around his destruction, his arrogance, his defiance of the Lord, his hatred for God's people. All those things that Antiochus Epiphanes demonstrated and history talks about. Verses 9 through 12 in Daniel 8, we'll get some context here. And out of one of them came forth a little horn. And again, there was, you could really start at the beginning of this, but we'll start at 9. Out of one of them came forth a little horn which waxed exceeding great toward the south and toward the east and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself, this little horn of verse 9, that came out of one of the four, that is the four horns referenced earlier, that he magnified himself even to the prince of the host. We made the case last week that that's none other than the Lord. And by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down, and an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. So the little horn was very destructive, overthrowing truth. He, verse 11, magnified himself even to the prince of the host. He magnified, he blasphemed, he disrupted the proper work in the sanctuary, the proper sacrifice in the sanctuary, and casting truth to the ground and trampling on it. And most say that he did that literally, tearing up the law of God, trampling on it. And in all of this, remember verse 13, for a prescribed season, for a prescribed time. How long will this take place? Verse 14, unto 2,300 days. All of this very specific, reminding Daniel that God's in control. Reminding Daniel that none of this is out of my control. And whatever we take away from Daniel as a book, whatever we take away from these visions and these things that we've been studying, if we don't take anything else away, take away the fact that God is in control. He sets up kingdoms and he puts down kingdoms at his pleasure and for his purpose. And he's doing the same, by the way, today. Whatever kingdom rises, whatever kingdom falls. Whatever government rises, whatever government falls. He's ultimately in control of that. God's ultimately in control of that. God's ultimately working out his perfect will. And we can take that away from Daniel, and we can see a hint of it in verse 14 of our chapter, that he says it's going to last 2,300 days. And that's it. The temple will be cleansed, and right sacrifice will be once again practiced. Now in verse 17, we kind of get a hint. And he says, in verse 17, so he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell upon my face. But he said unto me, understand, O Son of Man, for at the time of the end, and right there is where that at the time of the end shall be the vision. That's where good, solid commentators begin to divide, and they say a far end, a near fulfillment with Antiochus, and then a far fulfillment with the Antichrist at the end. And some say, no, it's just the end of the days of Antiochus Epiphanes. As I get into the rest of the chapter, I'll explain to you why I think it has reference to latter days and the end times. Verse 17 said that. We read it. Verse 18 and 19, let's read. Now as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face toward the ground, but he touched me and sat me upright. That makes me smile every time I read it. This is so overwhelming to Daniel. He's just out. And he sits him back up. You got more to listen to. Now sit up and listen. And he said, verse 19, "Behold, I will make thee to know what shall be in the," notice this, "the last end." The last end of the indignation. "For at the time appointed, the end shall be." And again, some take that as the end of Antiochus and his tyrannical reign, and some make reference to that. They don't disprove that. History proves that he lived and did what he did to the Jews and to the temple. That's no issue. The question of that is not even a reasonable question. Some then say it seems to reference more the last end. And I lean into that camp because of how the rest of the chapter falls. And then remember verse 20 and 21 that outlines the kingdoms. We dealt with those. Verse 23. "And in the latter time of their kingdom," and again, it's language that I can see both sides of the commentator debate. It can be the latter time of this near fulfillment of the prophecy. It can easily be that. I think it can be that, and I find in the Scriptures dual fulfillment of prophecy. It's not at all unheard of that the prophecy that is spoken that has a near fulfillment with a literal person in the Old Testament, say David is a king and he's a type of Christ, and there's a fulfillment that takes place in something in his life, and then it's also a type and pictures something that would be fulfilled with Christ or in Christ. And I see that begin to develop. "And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full." And that's terminology that we run into in the Scriptures often. For example, if you're taking notes, you can write down Genesis 15 and verse 16. And he talks about transgression not yet being full. And he was naming a country. I don't remember the country in that verse, but he's naming a people, and he said their transgression is not yet full. I'm continuing to be patient with them. They will continue to go down a wrong road. They will continue to heap up transgression, and at some point I'll have enough. And that I'll draw that line, and that can be described as their transgression coming to the full. He said in verse 23, "In the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full." It's simply a phrase that means I'm not giving them any more rope. I'm dealing with it now. "A king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sayings shall stand up." Immediately, you can easily go to history and say, Antiochus Epiphanes, a man of fierce countenance, the things that he did to torture Jews is almost unparalleled. There are some that tried, but he's one of the worst. And that can be seen later on in the book of Revelation, fulfilled in the Antichrist as well. And understanding dark sentences. This dark sentences is a way, it's the literal rendering of that is he knows how to deceive people with dark sayings. He's well equipped to deceive. And Antiochus was that, but remember studying the Antichrist? And remember studying that how, and we'll get into this in chapter 9, Lord willing, that how he brokered a deal of peace, and that he promised that he would usher in peace, and how refreshing that sounds to the world, and especially the Jew. And he does so, and we'll see that again in a minute, he does so but through deceit. And that's what's captured in the Hebrew as it makes reference here in our translation, understanding dark sentences, that he knows how to deceive through deception, through dark sayings. He knows how to conceal the truth and just say what you want to say, what he wants you to hear, and cause people to believe that. And there's no doubt that fulfills the idea of the Antichrist and what he does. And of course the fierce countenance, there's no doubt in that either. Hold your finger in Daniel 8. And then jump up with me to 2 Thessalonians 2 and hold your finger there. Because we're going to be back and forth in these passages now, and then one in Revelation 13. I actually knew I was going to be back and forth a lot, so tonight I put a bookmark in. And we're going to deal with this idea of, in verse 23 of our text, that he had that fierce countenance. That's undisputed as it relates to, and this is the portion now where I'm going to get into the Antichrist being pictured. And it's not in dispute that he was of a fierce countenance. It just didn't show up at first by his design. But he had understanding dark sentences, and I believe you study that out, you'll see that it has to do with deceit. Look what 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verses 9 and 10 has to say about the Antichrist. 2 Thessalonians 2:9, even him whose coming is after the working of Satan with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness. And 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 is describing the coming of the Antichrist. And we can easily see that when you read through it. We're going to read a lot of it in 2 Thessalonians 2 tonight. But the Antichrist will come with all deceivableness of unrighteousness, with signs and lying wonders. We studied that in Revelation, and we saw the deception. We saw the blasphemy. We saw him broker that peace agreement, that peace accord that then he broke in 3.5 years. We studied those things. And our text tells us, as a reference to the little horn, and I believe the little horn is the near fulfillment, the Antichrist is the far fulfillment, that he will be a king of fierce countenance and understand dark sayings, and he shall stand up. He will rise to the surface. He will come to the surface. And Antiochus Epiphanes did. The Antichrist one day will. He'll stand up. He'll take the stage. Let's go to Revelation 13. And again, keep a finger in these others. Revelation 13:1. I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads, 10 horns, and upon his heads, horns, 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And we will, if you remember, the dragon, who is Satan, empowers the beast, who is the Antichrist. And here in chapter 13 and verse 1, he comes on to the scene. John sees him rise up. Remember that terminology there in out of the sand of the sea. We saw that terminology in Daniel as well. So in parallel, this one made reference of in Daniel 8, in that little horn, he's going to be fierce in his countenance. He's going to be full of lying wonders and deception, deceivableness of unrighteousness. Now back in our text, in verse 24, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. verse 24 of our text, not by his own power. He's energized by another. He's empowered by another. 2 Thessalonians 2 and verse 9. We just read it. I want to emphasize the first phrase. Even him whose coming is after the working of Satan. His coming is after the working of Satan. He's doing the work empowered by Satan. Look with me at this same thought in Revelation chapter 13 and verse 4. And they worshiped the dragon, Satan, which gave power to the beast. Did you see that? They worshiped Satan, which gave power to the beast, the Antichrist. Fits perfectly with what Daniel said in verse 24. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He's empowered by none other than Satan. And Revelation 13 bears that out very, very clearly. Verse 24 goes on to say, he shall destroy wonderfully or amazingly, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. He's obviously, that can be applied to Antiochus Epiphanes. It's a matter of history that he did that. Just martyred so many people. But you can't help but see the parallel with the Antichrist in verse 7 of chapter 13. Revelation. I told you this part would be a little technical. I'm sorry. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. He shall destroy mighty and holy people. Friend, the parallels of what Daniel has to say in these last few verses are so consistent. I see not only the near fulfillment in Antiochus Epiphanes, but the far fulfillment as well in the Antichrist. So, let's go back to Daniel 8. In the latter time of their kingdom, I'm in verse 23, in the latter time of their kingdom, when transgressors shall come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully or amazingly, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand. And he shall magnify himself in his heart. He'll magnify himself in his heart. Revelation 13. Revelation 13, verses 4 through 6. And they worshiped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. And they worshiped the beast, and the beast is Antichrist, remember, saying, who is like unto the beast, who is able to make war with him. And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. Power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. So he magnifies himself in his heart, even to the point where he can stand and blaspheme his Creator. He knows he's not his own Creator. He knows. You know that you are not here in and of your choice. You understand that. A thinking person understands that. But he magnifies himself even to his Creator and seeks to set himself above God. And he'll stand up against the Prince of Princes, our text in verse 25 says. But he shall be broken without hand. So he'll stand up against even the Lord. And the great portion of the book of Revelation is given over to that battle. And so you can see it in Antiochus. You can see that. But I see it in the Antichrist very much. And again, all of this power, all of this blasphemy, all of this ability. Notice what the end of verse 25 in our text says. But he shall be broken without hand. That's such a curious statement. On the simplest side of it, it won't be men that break him. It'll be God. He'll be broken without hand. But look how Paul says this in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. I hope you put a bookmark in there. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. In verse 8b, the end of verse 8. Let's read verse 8. And then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. He'll be broken without hand, is what our text said. Paul said he'll be destroyed, consumed with the spirit of his mouth, and destroyed with the brightness of his coming. That the Lord will do that. No hand required. And so you see all of these parallels. That's why I believe, and I didn't even give you all of them. I felt like I was throwing too many scriptures up. There's the parallels, the references that I had are so many, it would seem so clear to me that the near fulfillment in Antiochus is easily understandable, but the far fulfillment farther away in time in the Antichrist is also hard to walk away from, hard to deny. So, back in our text in Daniel, and we'll wrap up. Let's read it in its context, starting in verse 23. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall destroy wonderfully, or amazingly, and shall prosper, and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand. He shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall stand up against the Prince of Princes, but he shall be broken without hand. The vision of the evening and the morning, which he referenced in a few verses earlier, the vision of the evening and the morning, which was told, is true. Wherefore, shut thou up, for it shall be for many days. So I believe this shut this up is to protect it, close it up, not to conceal it, because he clearly is writing it. He's clearly, in verse 27, he's shared it. And so I believe that in verse 26, we see that he's saying, look, the information that I'm giving you about the empires that will rise and fall, it's all true. The information that I'm giving you about the time that the temple will be desecrated, being a space of 2,300 days, that's true. All of these things are true. And so the near fulfillment of that temple being cleansed is 6 1/3 years, roughly 2,300 days. Antiochus Epiphanes farther down in history before that is taken care of. But we understand that what God is saying here is true. Now, because it's true, the words that he used, shut thou up the vision, I believe that it is seal it and protect it and keep it safe, because it's going to stand and it's going to continue to unfold many days. And again, that can be up to the point of Antiochus Epiphanes and what goes on there, but I believe many more days is actually in view to the end of the times of the Gentiles. And so protect it, seal it. It's going to stand a long time. I, Daniel, fainted and was sick certain days afterward. This was a lot for him to digest. You think about, and I mentioned this last week, think about the position Daniel's in. He's been in captivity since he was a teenager. He's now, at this point in his life, roughly 70-ish. He's been in captivity the vast majority of his life. He's going to start the next chapter by saying, I know that the 70-year captivity is just about over. But what has he just heard? What has he just had a front row seat at learning that this captivity is over? Oh, but there's trouble coming. This captivity is over, and the temple's going to be desecrated again after they rebuild it. This temple, this is nearly over, but as far as the eye can see, Daniel sees trouble. More trouble. Antiochus Epiphanes, he sees in general terms. And he sees what kind of man he's going to be against the people of God and against the temple. And his captivity is about over with. But his whole life has been in captivity. He's longed for Jerusalem. He's longed for proper worship to take place in the temple. And he's just heard. There might be glimpses of that here and there, but there's a lot of trouble coming. I fainted and was sick certain days. Afterward, I rose up and did the king's business. And I was astonished at the vision. I was astonished at the vision. But none understood it. Apparently he shared it. Nobody else understood it. He was given divine insight into these things. We read that in the first chapter of the book. But this was a lot to digest. And then to see God beginning to name names of kingdoms that maybe weren't even organized yet, and certainly kings that hadn't even been born yet, and it astonished Daniel. But it was so much to take in. He said, I was sick certain days. And so ends chapter 8. Lord willing, we'll get into chapter 9, and we'll continue to see more and more information as God reveals times of the Gentiles to Daniel. So we'll close for tonight. Brother Jerry, would you all stand? Brother Jerry, would you dismiss us in prayer?